It's weird. Okay, so hello everyone. I don't know, for some reason it's not registering on YouTube that I'm able to hear myself. It's not showing any audio levels, and I was having trouble with it before. Um, so sorry about that. If you're watching, hello. I'm gonna do the spiel real quick. Let me get this off me. Before we start, I just want to make it clear that I am not a counselor. I'm not a professional, but I am currently working towards my master's in clinical counseling, so I will be a professional soon enough. And um, yeah, so whatever you hear here, take it with a grain of salt, and make sure you do your own research and look up different things. If we hear talk about something you don't know, ask a question, and maybe we can talk about it more. Um, Sorry, I'm all frazzled now. I'm all worked up because it wasn't working the first few times, and it's been kind of annoying. But it's up, I guess now, and I guess it's working. So today's topic is about masculinity, and yeah, I think it's a very important kind of concept that we talk about right now. Shout out my boy Elijah. He um, was talking to me about his work. He works in the mental health field, and he talked about how um, certain groups that he works with and generations um, struggle with this idea of masculinity and talking about emotions and feeling things. And I think it's just a kind of it's becoming a very slippery slope essentially, and I think it's very dangerous to kind of get into this mindset that a lot of people have when it comes to masculinity. um I think it is important to address your emotions whenever you feel something, because that is what we are. We're human and we have emotions. And I feel like when you think of masculinity and you think of the common saying about just toughen up or bottle up those feelings, like be a man. And then I see such a problematic it becomes such a problematic behavior because it just doesn't allow for any expression at all. And then we start to see certain things that come out of that, such as like men having the highest suicide rate among any demographic. And I think that's very telling, considering a lot of these ideology is based around the fact of not feeling anything and kind of just not allowing yourself to like feel emotion or be any type of empathetic or human. And I think that's where we get into kind of the field of different forms of masculinity coming to play. So I actually wrote a paper last semester, and I intend to actually do some research in regards to the idea and views of masculinity. The title of it was "The Sexualization of Males in Advertising in the U.S. Influences College Age Males' Views of Masculinity," and it was a paper that we kind of just explored the differences in the different masculinities and what they meant and how they may have come to tone, and how social media is a kind of an influencer, or the idea that sex sells in advertising becomes kind of problematic because it what's the word, it reduces the people, especially men, to just their sexualized parts, and it kind of dehumanizes them in a sense. But that's kind of a little bit off topic, but I did want to just say that I have put a decent amount of research into it, and I think, yeah, I'll read off some of our preliminary findings. So there are five main ideas of masculinity that we kind of came about, and that we came to kind of fruition. We have satirical masculinity, which is a phenomenon where advertisers have been using masculine to advertise for products that are formerly known to be feminine. So, what can this? I forget what example we used, but if it were to, let's just say, like maybe like a foundation or something to kind of hide blemishes, or something to do to kind of promote like beauty in men. They'd probably use something kind of jokingly to kind of say that this is very masculine, but they're advertising for something that has historically been seen to be used with femininity. Manvertising, trying to sell men on products that they presumably avoid for fear of what it might say about their gender or sexual identities. So I found this very interesting because it's not technically its own masculinity, but it's kind of just a form of it. And I think that's just kind of very telling because if you're interested or want to buy something, people shouldn't be making decisions based off what it might say about who they are. I think at that point, you really need to reflect inward and kind of create a more solid ground of how you identify, how you identify with your gender and your sexual identities. I think that's very important because if you're avoiding something out of fear just because you're worried that something, I think you need to just get a more solid foundation, especially when it comes to masculinity and knowing who you are and being comfortable in your own skin. And I know that's a very scary topic for a lot of people because identity is such an important factor when it comes to any cognitive development. And if someone may have struggled as a child with their identity and certain the identity aspects of growing up developmentally, they may be kind of stagnant or frozen in time in that area of identity. And I think that's sometimes people just forget that we're constantly working on our identity to become who we are and we're constantly growing and evolving. But it's also important to know that where your foundations lie and where kind of your identity and what you kind of side and agree and identify with. Traditional masculinity. So this is one that I feel like a lot of people have taken and turned to their own ideologies and kind of negative. So relatively enduring characteristic encompassing traits and appearances, interests, and behaviors that have traditionally been considered relatively more typical of men. So this is where we got this more of like stoicism, kind of being brave and looking out for others and being strong. And I feel like a lot of people have taken this and kind of turned it into twisted it to fit their own narrative, which is toxic masculinity. This is a set of attitudes and ways of behaving stereotypically associated with or expected of men, regardless of having a negative impact on men and society as a whole. So, kind of reflecting, I think people have taken traditional masculinity and kind of turned it to this toxic masculinity that has become be stronger than everyone, be a threat, or just be feared by many, or just do not allow any emotion into your life. And I feel like that's just a very problematic idea and very dangerous view to have because we see a lot of problems with those certain ideals and ideologies kind of coming out in men and what it does to not only society as a whole, but we'll also see what it negatively does towards men. It's I think I think it's really highly associated with or correlated with um, the suicide rates and how it is because we j- um, masculinity is such a social construct that I think a lot of um, it's constantly changing and evolving. Something such as it's I don't know how I want to word this. Some things that may have been masculine back then are definitely not something we would see masculine now. The way camaraderie ship was a lot more intimate back in with the Greeks, and if we were to behave in such a way now, we people would take just like against it and say it's not masculine because it's forever changing, and basically we as a entire grouping or population, we kind of set the standards and rules surrounding masculinity. But I think it's become so twisted and um, so kind of influenced by a lot of different views that we're getting these different forms of masculinity and it's kind of branching off and we're seeing toxic masculinity here, we're seeing traditional masculinity, we're seeing positive masculinity, being safe in your own skin and showing just doing what you want. And masculinity is just, I feel like, has been such a problem for past generations because they were taught to kind of just don't show emotion. This stoicism, but to the furthest degree on the spectrum possible, where you're not allowed to show emotion, you're not allowed to feel emotion, you're not allowed to do anything with emotion. And I feel like that's just leaving emotion just to everyone else and femininity, like, it's just not a good way of thinking or living. And we see that with clinical counseling. We see men depressed and anxiety stricken just because they have maybe these really strong emotions and feelings, and it's not being reciprocated when someone may be experiencing or just like expressing them. And that's an important thing I think we need as a community and country, that we just need to be more accepting of emotion all across the board. But especially with men, the way masculinity has kind of affected and influenced personal behavior, kind of allowing for these s- um, different variations of masculinity occur. If we had a well understanding and across the board of this positive masculinity that benefited everyone and society as a whole, we wouldn't have these problems. But because it's constantly changing, and it's not a worldly acceptance of a certain type, we see these different variations, and some of them can become problematic. We see toxic masculinity um, just hurting not only ourselves or men in general, we see it's hurting society as a whole. Toxic masculinity of pushing others to not be happy or just bring more negativity in the world, I think is just such an awful way of thinking, and it just has to be such a miserable way of expending energy into the world to kind of bring others down, and not be okay with the expression of someone, and not seeing as not heroic. I don't want to say heroic, because expressing emotion is just one of the most human things you can do. And I think that's really important for people to really just kind of focus on. And I know it's a difficult concept. And again, it is very, because it's socially constructed, we see it, and the way we've maybe expressing our views of masculinity may because maybe influenced by how our peers view it. And we, since we are social beings and we desire relationships with one another, we kind of react or behave in a way that we think would be more accepted from others. And that becomes kind of like very like cyclical pattern, because then the other person who accepted that form will see that you're behaving that way, and now I got to behave that way. And then again, it kind of just cycles back down to, what are these behaviors are we promoting that are good, and parts of these behaviors are we promoting that are negative. And I think it's just again, we a lot of people just take it to the far end of the spectrum, and it becomes problematic in its own way. um, and we again, masculinity, because it's a social construct, just these people, everyone gets to kind of have part say and gets to kind of influence in one way or another. And I just think masculinity is just being who you are and standing up for what's right. And again, I mean, that's a very subjective term. What's right? I mean, how do I get to say what's right? And I think that eventually kind of ties back to philosophical ideologies with what is right? What am I saying morally right? Am I saying subjectively right? Am I saying objectively right? And uh, I mean, I don't think there's anybody that's actually objectively right. So I don't want to make that apparent, but um, it's a very interesting topic, and I'm glad we're seeing with this new generation pushing for positive masculinity in a way that benefits society as a whole, but as well as men as a whole too. Because I think people are realizing that they don't want to suffer in silence anymore, and people have more, especially the younger generations, have been very more accepting of men and their feelings. Again, I'm not saying like the older generations aren't, but I'm saying the younger generations are more typically accepting of this, and then accepting of new trends, and especially accepting of mental health. Like, we're seeing mental health positivity and acceptance at a higher rate in the younger generations than older generations even still are. And I think that again just reflects as to is a different time period, and the older generations aren't to be at fault. It's what they're taught. It's what's passed down through generations. I just think that the younger generations are just seeing it and starting to see kind of problematic um, factors or parts of it that they don't align with or agree with, and they're kind of going to change the entire ideology that surrounds mental health and masculinity as a whole. And I think we see a lot of it even in our culture today, or across um, popular celebrities and stuff, how they're pushing these idea of gender norms or views of masculinity and what it means to them. And I think that's opening up a lot of the younger generations to really be more accepting and aligning with something more, seeing celebrities express emotion as a man in a way that they kind of more align with. And I think that's what's creating this push from the younger generation to really do what they want to do and express how they want to express and feel what they want to feel. And it's instead of what the older generations were just taught to, and sometimes just like beaten out of it. Like they were more physical beings back then. And I think it was just a more detrimental aspect, and that kind of hurt their views and perspectives on a lot of things. Um, and yeah, so I just think that that's an important aspect of masculinity, um, to kind of really take into account. It all comes down to kind of your views, your morals, your understanding of the world around you. And masculinity is a forever changing concept. There is no rule, law in a book. There's no f- even I found many different definitions while doing this paper. Um, so I'm curious to see if I do continue on with my group and my one professor and carry out this study. I may get published, which would be really cool as a graduate student. Um, but I also would just be really curious to kind of see the different ideas and perspectives on masculinity and what that has how that has come to be because of certain things, and the differences in opinion on what a commercial looks like now, like a masculine commercial looks like now, as opposed to what a masculine commercial back then looked like. Um, I'm always interested in other people's ideas and perspectives. So if you have a idea or perspective on masculinity, leave it in the comments below. Do you agree with some of the things I've said? Do you disagree with some of the things I've said? Um, but I would really love to just talk more about it. And I'll let you know if I do get that posted or thing, and then maybe you'll be able to read my study that I've done. So um, we'll see where that goes. And thank you for watching. I hope this is actually recording. My girlfriend let me know that she can hear it. So, but it was not working the first few times. So if you click the wrong link and you're just here now, thank you for trying to find it. And I will catch you guys next video or Mental Health Monday. Make sure you like, comment, and subscribe. And I will see you guys next Monday. See ya.